You walked out of that theater smiling. And I need you to stop and ask yourself why. Because if you smiled at the end of Spider-Man No Way Home, if you applauded, if you felt that warm rush of nostalgia and relief when all three Spider-Men stood on screen together, then the movie played you completely. And it wasn't an accident. It was intentional, calculated, and brilliant in its cruelty. They gave you everything you wanted to see. Precisely so, you wouldn't notice what was actually happening. Because while you were transfixed by the iconic suits, the callbacks, the classic villains, and the electric energy of the biggest movie event in years, a 17-year-old kid was being destroyed. Not by a villain, not by a battle, but by the very universe he chose to protect, and by the arrogance of the man who was supposed to protect him in return. That's what we're talking about today. No filters, no golden haze of nostalgia blurring the edges. We're going to look at what No Way Home actually is once you strip away the spectacle and examine what's underneath. And what's underneath is terrifying. Because it's a tragedy, an existential tragedy about the systematic erasure of an entire life, about a teenager who got chewed up and spat out by the cosmos, and who will never, not ever be able to go back to what he was. And the worst part? He asked for it to happen. He signed the contract without reading the fine print. He paid the ultimate price for someone else's mistake. And if you still think that ending was heroic, stay with me, because I'm going to change that. Let's start at the beginning, the exact moment where everything unravels, not the final spell. Before that, way before that. Let's start with the moment Peter Parker walked into Dr. Strange's Sanctum Sanctorum and asked for the impossible. Think about this for a second. Peter is a kid, 17 years old. His secret identity has just been blown wide open in front of the entire world. His life flipped upside down in the space of a few hours. He lost his shot at MIT. His best friends lost their shot at MIT just by knowing him. The girl he loves is suffering real consequences for the crime of being associated with him, and so he does what any desperate person would do. He goes looking for help. He goes to the most powerful person he knows and asks for a way out. But here's the question nobody seems to be asking. What exactly did Stephen Strange owe Peter Parker in that moment? The answer, if you sit with it, is nothing. And yet Strange agrees to help. Not just agrees. He agrees to perform one of the most dangerous and ethically questionable spells in the entire canon of the mystic arts. A global memory alteration spell. A spell that rewrites the subjective reality of every living human being on the planet. And he does this. Why? Out of kindness? Compassion? Or because Dr. Strange has never been able to resist demonstrating just how much he can do? Think about who Stephen Strange fundamentally is. Think about his arc in the first film. He was a brilliant, insufferably arrogant surgeon who had to have his hands shattered before he would even consider humility. And even after that entire journey, the ego is still there, dressed up as competence, camouflaged as responsibility, but still there, underneath everything. And when Strange begins casting the spell, Peter keeps interrupting with modifications. First, his family should still know, then his friends, then his classmates. Every addition Peter makes is completely understandable from a human perspective, but every addition is also a crack in the structural integrity of the spell, and Strange keeps allowing it. He keeps allowing an emotionally devastated teenager to modify a reality-altering procedure in real time, as if that's acceptable, as if that's safe, as if a surgeon would let the patient adjust the dosage mid-operation. And when the spell begins fracturing the multiverse, the blame, in the film's framing, lands on Peter. But is it really Peter's fault? No, it isn't. The fault belongs to Strange. It belongs to the man who should have said no. Who should have explained the risks? Who should have sat down with that kid and said, I understand what you're going through, but what you're asking for isn't a solution. It's a detonation, and I'm not lighting the fuse. But Strange didn't do that. Strange cast the spell, and when it went wrong, when the multiverse started cracking and supervillains from parallel realities began pouring through, suddenly it was Peter's problem. Suddenly it was Peter's responsibility. Suddenly it had to be Peter, a kid with no magical training, no cosmic understanding, no experience with the fabric of reality, who cleaned up what the Sorcerer Supreme, with all his power and all his supposed wisdom, had broken through sheer impulsiveness and professional negligence. And this is where the real tragedy begins, because Peter accepts. Peter always accepts. This is the Spider-Man curse in its purest form. This crushing, overwhelming sense of responsibility that wasn't installed in him by the universe, but that he voluntarily carries because someone once told him that great power demands great responsibility. And he internalized that so deeply that self-sacrifice has become his default setting, his reflex. He doesn't even stop to ask whether the sacrifice is fair, whether it's his debt to pay. But before we get to the final spell, we need to talk about the others, the two men who arrived from parallel dimensions, the two other Spider-Men, Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield. And I know what you felt when they appeared on screen. I know because I felt it too. The music, the recognition, the emotion hitting you like a freight train, that sense that something sacred was unfolding. But now I want you to look at these two men differently, not as heroes, as mirrors, as prophecies. From Peter Parker's psychological perspective, from Tom Holland's Peter, Tobey and Andrew aren't allies arriving to save the day. They are the ghosts of Christmas future. They are versions of himself who survived decades of being Spider-Man. And what do they have to show for it? What does the future hold for anyone who wears the mask? Look at Tobey Maguire's Peter, a man who spent years sacrificing everything for the secret identity, who lost Mary Jane over and over, who carried the weight of Uncle Ben's death like a stone in his chest for his entire adult life, who was betrayed by friends, manipulated by enemies, abandoned by the city he dedicated himself to protecting. He smiles, but the smile has exhaustion in it, resignation, the lightness of someone who has nothing left to lose because they already lost everything that mattered, once, a long time ago. And now look at Andrew Garfield's Peter. This one is even more devastating because his wound is still open. He hasn't moved on. He still carries Gwen Stacy the way you carry a ghost that follows you into every room. And when he catches MJ, when he finally gets to catch the girl the villain threw from a lethal height, you see it on his face. Relief, yes. But the specific kind of relief that only exists when guilt has become unbearable. He isn't celebrating a victory. He's granting himself a partial absolution for a failure that was never entirely his to carry, but that he carried anyway, every single day, as if it were. These two men, these two future versions of Peter Parker, didn't arrive bringing hope. They arrived bringing evidence. Evidence that the curse is real. That it doesn't matter which universe, which timeline, which person you love, or what you build. Being Spider-Man is a sentence of loss, a life guarantee of isolation, a cosmic promise that every time you try to have something normal, something human, something yours, the universe will reach in and take it back. Not as punishment, just as the price. It's always the price. And Tom Holland's Peter, 17 years old, was staring at his own future, and his future had the face of tired men who have forgotten what it feels like to not be in pain. Then we arrive at Aunt May. And here I need you to breathe for a second, because this part lands differently. The death of Aunt May isn't just a death in a superhero movie. It's the fracture point, the moment Peter's entire emotional architecture collapses. And there's a detail in that scene that people move past far too quickly. Her last words, "With great power comes great responsibility." The same words, the words that shaped Peter from the very beginning. But this time, they don't land like inspiration. They land like a curse being renewed, like the universe saying, "You still haven't learned. You still haven't paid enough. There's still more I can take from you." And Peter falls. Literally, he falls from the building with May's body and lands on the cold asphalt of New York City, surrounded by broken glass, holding the woman who was his mother in every way that mattered. While the world keeps moving, cars pass, people run. The cosmos doesn't pause. The cosmos never pauses for the grief of a boy alone on a sidewalk. And it's here, at this point of total collapse, that the other Peter, Tobey's Peter, finds him on a rooftop and says something that almost nobody quotes when they talk about this film. He says he lost someone too. that he carried that guilt to, that he almost lost himself to rage to. And this scene, which feels small, which seems like just a quiet emotional beat between set pieces, is actually the most important scene in the entire movie, because it is the only moment where someone looks at Peter Parker as a person, where someone says, "I know what you're feeling, because I felt it too." Not to give him a lesson, not to prepare him for the next fight, but because he needs to know that he is not alone. And then, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the people who make conversations like this one possible. A genuine thank you to every member of Fractured Plot who supports this channel. You're the reason we get to go this deep, this slow, without having to simplify the things that deserve to be complicated. This kind of analysis only exists because you give it room to exist. Thank you. And if you're new here, if someone sent you this video or the algorithm dropped you in mid-scroll, subscribe to Fractured Plot. Because we don't do plot summaries here. We do narrative autopsies. And if this analysis is already making you see the film differently, go hit that like button right now and drop a comment telling me, do you still think the ending of No Way Home was heroic? Or are you starting to see the tragedy that was hiding underneath all that nostalgia? I genuinely want to read what you think. But back to the film. After May's death, Peter's plan changes. He no longer wants to cure the villains. He no longer wants to help Norman Osborn or Otto Octavius find their way back to who they were before. He wants to send them all back to their universes to die. And that's understandable. It's completely humanly understandable. He just lost the last parental figure he had. He's consumed by grief and fury. Rage is one of the most natural faces of loss. But here's something the film does with quiet, devastating precision. It uses Peter's pain to justify a shift in his values, then uses the other Peters to pull him back. And that arc looks like redemption from the outside. It looks like the hero finding his way. But what's actually happening is that Peter Parker is never allowed to be human, never permitted to make a wrong call, to be angry, to choose himself. Every time he tries, the universe redirects him back onto the track of sacrifice. Then we reach the Statue of Liberty battle, and we reach the single most painful moment in the entire film. Norman Osborn, with the Green Goblin in control, sends MJ falling from a lethal height, and Peter doesn't reach her in time. Andrew reaches her. Andrew catches MJ, and this is framed as a healing moment for Andrew's Peter, as if he's finally repaired the defining wound of his life. But think about what that means for Tom Holland's Peter. He came within inches of losing the person he loves most in the world. He lived through the absolute terror of watching the Gwen Stacy story begin to repeat itself with MJ's name on it. And the only reason MJ is alive is because another version of him, from another universe, got there first. Tom Holland's Peter was saved by accident, not by his own heroism, not by his own power, by a multiverse variable he didn't control. And that reveals something profound about where he is emotionally at this point in the film. He is failing, he is fragmenting, and none of the adults around him are acknowledging that with the seriousness it deserves. And then Peter has the idea, the spell, the new spell. Make everyone forget who Peter Parker is, not just that he's Spider-Man, but who he is as a human being. Erase Peter Parker from the collective memory of humanity. And when he brings this to Strange, Strange agrees immediately. No hesitation, no questions, no pause where he says, "Wait, kid, do you understand what you're actually asking for? You're asking to stop existing in the memory of everyone who loves you. You're asking to become a ghost. You're asking to commit social suicide." Nobody said that to Peter. Nobody sat down with him and walked through what everyone forgetting who Peter Parker is actually means in practice. Not just emotionally, not just in terms of friendship, but in terms of bureaucratic legal systemic existence. Nobody said, "Peter, when this spell is complete, you won't have a birth certificate anyone can verify. You won't have a school transcript. You won't have a social security record that any government database recognizes as active. You won't be able to sign a lease because the system will have no record of your existence as a legal person. You will be invisible, not to your enemies, to the state, to society, to the entire infrastructure of modern citizenship." Nobody said that, and Peter didn't know. And that is a profound, almost criminal failure of care. Let's sit with what the forgetting actually means. Because the film scores this spell with music that is melancholy, but beautiful. The lighting is warm. Peter cries, but with a kind of dignity. And you cry with him. You feel like you're witnessing something noble. Oh. But what is actually happening is the systematic demolition of a human identity. Walk through it piece by piece. MJ forgets Peter Parker, not Spider-Man. Peter Parker, the boyfriend, the boy she loved. Her memory is rewritten so that the space Peter occupied in her life simply doesn't exist. And Ned too. Ned Leeds, Peter's best friend since childhood. Years of shared history, erased. Inside jokes that will never make sense again because one half of them is gone. Secrets that dissolve. The kind of friendship that defines who you are. Gone. And Aunt May. Well, Aunt May is already gone. But her friends, her neighbors, her book club, the teachers who watched Peter grow up, the doctor who knew his medical history from the time he was a small child, the guy at the corner bodega who always saved the good stuff for him. Everyone. Every single person. And now, go deeper. Peter Parker has no active record in any system. That means no verifiable ID with consistent history behind it. No high school diploma, because no school has a record of him attending. MIT, the dream school he sacrificed everything trying to reach, has no application on file. No letters of recommendation. No candidate named Peter Parker, because as far as MIT's admissions database is concerned, that candidate never existed. No medical history. Any doctor who examines him is starting from a blank file. Any allergy, any condition, any vaccine record, inaccessible. Because the doctors who treated him no longer remember that he was ever their patient. No financial history, no credit score, no bank account tied to an identity the system recognizes as real, which means no ability to sign a lease the conventional way. No ability to get a formal job, because any employer who runs a background check will find gaps and inconsistencies that don't add up. Peter Parker became a ghost before his 18th birthday. And the final scene, the scene that so many people read as hope, is actually the most desperate scene in the entire film if you're watching with clear eyes. A tiny apartment, no furniture, no decoration, nothing that suggests a human being has ever lived there before. A mattress maybe, a window overlooking a gray stretch of street, and Peter Parker, alone, laying out his Spider-Man suit on an improvised table. No name, no history, no family, no friends who recognize him, no legible future beyond living at the margins of the society he chose to protect. That is not a fresh start. Do not let the film romanticize what you're looking at. A fresh start requires a foundation, a foothold, an anchor, a name that the world knows. Peter Parker has none of that. He has a suit and a superpower and the weight of everything he lost, and not a single person around him even knows a loss occurred. That is not rebirth. That is destitution, existential destitution. And he chose it, but not freely. He chose it within the set of options that someone older, more powerful, and far less careful had constructed for him. Which brings me back to Stephen Strange, because the film treats Strange as a morally complex, but fundamentally well-intentioned figure, and I reject that framing entirely. Strange is not just responsible for the multiverse crisis, he is responsible for Peter Parker's fate. And he accepted that responsibility with a casualness that should disturb you. When Strange agrees to perform the original spell, he is the adult in the room. He is the sorcerer supreme. He understands the mystic arts in ways that Peter never will. He knows, or should know, that global reality alteration spells carry consequences. He knows, or should know, that allowing an emotionally unstable teenager to modify an active ritual in real time is cosmically reckless. And he knows, or should know, that the outcome of a spell that makes the world forget Peter Parker is not just emotional. It is existential, bureaucratic, social, and irreversible. But Strange doesn't pause to think about any of that. Strange doesn't sit Peter down and say, if this spell works the way you're asking, you will exist in a kind of social limbo. You will be a citizen with no verifiable record in a world that runs entirely on verifiable records. You will need to rebuild your identity from zero. And that's not just emotionally difficult. Without institutional help, It is practically impossible. And I, as the Sorcerer Supreme, have an obligation to tell you that before you sign the sentence. He says none of that. And then, when the multiverse collapses because of his own poorly executed spell, the solution he proposes to fix his own mistake is to cast an even more radical spell, one that erases Peter Parker from all human memory. And he does it. And then he disappears, and Peter stands alone in an empty apartment with a Spider-Man suit and no legible future. Strange committed malpractice. In any human context, what he did would have a name: negligence. And depending on the jurisdiction and the specifics, it might have a harsher name than that. He performed high-risk magical procedures on a minor without informed consent, without explaining the collateral consequences, without having a contingency plan that didn't destroy that minor's life. And at the end of it all, he walks away unscathed. He remains the Sorcerer Supreme. He keeps the sanctum. He retains his power and his purpose and his status. And Peter Parker lives in a shadow. That is not justice, and the film doesn't interrogate it with the depth it deserves. But there's something even darker I need to say. Something that goes beyond the forgetting and the bureaucratic consequences. Something that cuts into the deepest psychological layer of what Peter Parker has just lived through. Because Peter didn't just lose his social identity. He lost shared grief. And that is cruel in a way that most people never stop to process. When someone dies in a person's life, there is a structure for it. There is a funeral. There are conversations. There is the collective acknowledgement that something has been lost. The community gathers and says, yes, that person existed. Yes, this pain is real. Yes, you have every right to mourn. And that acknowledgement, as painful as it is necessary. It is load-bearing for the human psyche. It is part of how we survive loss. Peter lost Aunt May. And when the spell lands, nobody will remember that May existed in Peter's life. Nobody will be able to share that grief with him. Nobody will be able to say, I know how much she meant to you. Because nobody will know that he existed to her, or that she existed to him in the way that she did. He will carry that loss in complete isolation, in an empty apartment, without a name anyone recognizes, without a support system, without a single person in the world who can say, you are Peter Parker, and you have lost so much. That is a form of loneliness that goes beyond what most human beings can conceive of. Not the loneliness of being alone at a party. Not the loneliness of having nobody to text on a Friday night. This is the loneliness of existing in a social vacuum, of being the sole custodian of your own memory, of waking up every morning knowing that the entire life you lived, every laugh, every scar, every moment that made you who you are, exists only inside one skull on the entire planet. No witness, no echo, no one who can confirm that any of it was real. That is the kind of loneliness that destroys people from the inside. That makes them question whether what they remember actually happened or whether it was an elaborate, exhausting dream. And Peter Parker, who already had deep tendencies toward isolation, who already sacrificed relationships as a matter of instinct, will face this without any support whatsoever. Because there is no support available for a loss the world doesn't know occurred. And there's one more dimension to this erasure that needs to be named before we move on. The dimension of the dream. Because Peter Parker wasn't just a kid with powers. He was a kid with genuine intellectual ambition. A brilliant student. Someone who dreamed about science, about discovery, about contributing to the world with his mind as much as with his fists. MIT wasn't just a college. It was proof that there was a path beyond the mask. That Spider-Man could one day hang up the suit and become a scientist who changed the world with equations instead of uppercuts. And that dream, that specific, intellectual, completely legitimate human dream, was the spark that ignited this entire tragedy. Because it was about MIT? It was because Peter wanted to make sure MJ and Ned had the same shot he did. It was out of love for his friends that he walked into Strange's sanctum. It was that small dream of a shared future that set in motion every event that destroyed everything. And when the spell completes, MIT won't know Peter Parker exists. The application is gone. The recommendation letters referencing a student named Peter Parker will be inconsistencies that nobody in the admissions office can explain. And the scientific dream, the dream of using intelligence for something larger than survival, will have to begin again from absolute zero. No credentials, no transcript, no one who can verify that this kid spent years pursuing knowledge with a seriousness most adults never reach. The spell didn't just erase Peter's relationships, it erased his possible future. It erased the version of him that might have existed without the mask. Now let me ask you a different question, one you may have never considered. Where is Tony Stark in this analysis? Tony Stark bears responsibility for Peter Parker. Not legally, perhaps, but morally. Tony recruited Peter. Tony gave him the first suit. Tony dropped him into the middle of the Avengers Civil War when Peter was 15 years old with zero real combat experience. Tony mentored him and protected him to a point, but also placed him in genuinely dangerous situations without always ensuring that Peter had the emotional and psychological support necessary to process what he was living through. And then Tony died, and Peter was left without a mentor, without a father figure, without a guide in a world he knew was dangerous, with powers he was still learning to control, with an exposed secret identity, and with the one adult who could have helped him navigate all of it gone. The suit Tony left Peter is not a gift. It's a burden. It's the weight of a legacy that no teenager should be asked to carry, and everyone treats it as something noble, something beautiful, the passing of the torch from one hero to the next. But nobody talks about what it means for Peter to be the heir of Tony Stark without Tony Stark, to have to measure up to a name he never asked to inherit, to carry the weight of an entire world's expectations and grief about a man he is constantly compared to, in a world that just suffered an incomprehensible loss. Peter Parker was not equipped for what was asked of him, and not one adult in his orbit stopped to acknowledge that. And now that you're seeing the film from a different angle, I want you to think about what I'm going to call the mirror scene. It's not a literal scene. It's the moment before the final spell, where Peter is essentially looking at himself for the last time. And in his eyes, if you pause and actually look, you don't see heroism. You see resignation. You see the expression of someone who has arrived at the conclusion that the only way to stop destroying the people he loves is to stop existing for them. And that, stated with the clinical directness it deserves, is a logic that surfaces in a very specific and very dark context in human psychology. The belief that your absence is a gift to the people who love you is one of the most devastating and dangerous cognitive patterns that exist. And the film uses that logic as the foundation of Peter's most noble act. I'm not saying the film should have been different. I'm saying you should sit with that act under heavier weight than the film gives you time to apply to it. Because while the score is swelling and the light is turning golden and you're crying from the beauty of it, a 17-year-old is choosing to erase himself, to become nothing, to be the only living witness to his own existence. And that should hurt in a way that goes beyond entertainment. Returning to the Ghosts of Christmas Future for a moment, because there's one final layer to this analysis that has to be spoken aloud. Toby and Andrew helped Peter. They were generous and warm and present in a way that genuinely mattered, but they are also examples of survival, not flourishing. They are alive, but are they okay? Is Toby's Peter happy? Has Andrew's Peter found his way through the grief? Or are they exactly what they appear to be? Men who learned to live with pain because the alternative was not living at all. And Tom Holland's Peter looks at them and chooses to continue. Chooses to be Spider-Man, even knowing that the future might look like these two exhausted men. And that is framed as courage. But it is also a form of surrender. A surrender of any attempt to have a life beyond the mask. A surrender of the idea that he could be human first and a hero second. Because Peter has learned the lesson the hard way now, the universe won't allow it. Every time he tries to build something human, something personal, something his own, the cosmos comes and levels it. So why try? Why not just be Spider-Man? Why not embrace the role entirely and let Peter Parker die for real? And that is what he does. Not metaphorically, practically. Peter Parker dies, not physically, but socially, bureaucratically. in the memory of everyone who ever loved him. And what remains is a man with powers and a mission and a past that exists in a single brain on the face of the entire earth. This is the horror of Spider-Man, not the villains, not the danger. This is the horror, the possibility that the mask consumes the person, that the hero survives and the human being disappears, that you wake up one day and everything you are is the ability to climb walls and shoot webs, and that is enough for the world around you, but not enough for you. And before we close, let me ask you again. At the start, I asked whether you still think the ending of No Way Home was heroic. You've been here through all of this, you've heard every layer of it, and now I genuinely want to know what you think. Go leave a like, drop a comment. Was that ending an act of heroism? Or was it the most brilliantly disguised tragedy in the history of superhero cinema? Tell me, because there's one last thing I need to leave with you. No Way Home is frequently called the best Spider-Man movie, the best MCU film, the defining superhero movie of a generation. And maybe it is, but what makes it so powerful is not what you think it is. It isn't the nostalgia, it isn't the event, it isn't the image of 3 Spider-Men standing side by side. It's that underneath all the celebration, underneath all the emotion and the spectacle and the fan service, there is a real story about the cost of being good, the cost of being the kind of person who always puts others first. Every time, without exception. The cost of never being allowed to be selfish or fragile or simply human. And that cost is too high. Too high for a 17-year-old, too high for anyone. And the fact that we paid money to watch it happen, that we cried, that we walked out smiling, that says something about us too, about how deeply conditioned we are to celebrate sacrifice, to find beauty in self-erasure, to not question it when someone says they have to cease to exist so that others can be okay. Peter Parker was a kid who wanted to go to college with his girlfriend and his best friend. That was the entire dream, small, human, ordinary. And the cosmos took it from him, then took more, then took everything. And at the end, in the empty apartment, he was left with the mission. Just the mission, nothing else. That is not a triumphant superhero. That is a boy the world broke, who decided to use the broken pieces to keep protecting the people who no longer even know his name. And if that is not one of the saddest stories ever put on screen, wearing the costume of an action movie, I don't know what is.